skip over the public comment criteria, and we're gonna move right into the 4-day work week.
Can we check to see whether we have any?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it's okay not to read the rules again, but do we have any public comment for the activities committee?
Please, go ahead, Mrs. Furlong.
Sue Furlong, West Rock Hill Township, on the 4-day work week. I did notice this year that you carved out the 4th of July week. Is that going to be a 5-day work week? Or,
So we'll address that when we get there.
okay. And then the other thing is, are there any administrative audits that the hours are being adhered to building by building? I know last year each building had different hours, which I quite frankly found a little confusing. Is there going to be any conformity building to building, or is it again going to be sort of ad hoc that the building gets to decide their hours? And will there be administrative audits to make sure that if somebody is leaving early or coming in late, that the appropriate vacation time is being requested on their personal usage? I have an issue with that. And then also, it would be nice for the utility savings to be calculated again. That is the justification. So I think that, in fairness, the public needs to understand what that number is. Thank you.
I think we'll answer most of your questions tonight.
Great.
All right, so as Mrs. Furlong indicated, we've had 4-day work weeks in place for quite some time. We are looking for support this evening to move this memorandum of understanding onto the March board meeting. Let's talk a little bit about what's in this current MOU. This is asking for the period of June 24th through August 9th, 2019 to be 4-day work weeks. We actually would net 6 Fridays of savings in there because the week of the 4th would be a little bit different. So as you go down further, work schedules will be set by the building administrators to reflect a Monday through Thursday work week with the exception of the week of the 4th. So during that week, staff would be scheduled for 8.5-hour days on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, and then July 4th would be their paid holiday. As far as hours set by the building, we have not set hours for summer buildings yet, but once we do, they would be published. So we'll have that discussion as we do every year. We are out in buildings in the summer, so they're not operating in isolation. So we do see as people come and go as best as we can in a district this size. A little bit about the energy savings. We did look at that this year with the new Director of Facilities here on staff, Director of Operations, Mr. Kelly Harper. He and I did look at the daily energy costs as best as we could. It's not an easy calculation to come up with because every building's a little bit different, but as we looked at this, we came up with, for the summer, a figure of $2,335.37 daily energy cost. With that said, there is some energy used on days that the buildings are closed. So for instance, you have your vital alarm systems, security systems, those kind of things that are going to still be operational, alarms, smoke systems, all that kind of stuff. That's still going to be functional. You'll have minimal energy. You'll have air conditioning in the high school and central office due to artwork and things like that. So we estimated about 30% energy would be used on the days that were closed. So if we look at 6 Fridays and take 70% savings, we're looking at for this summer approximately $9,808.55. And we were not that precise before. We estimated in the summer's time, with Mr. Loeffler's help, that we would save between $10,000 and $15,000 based on the numbers that he had looked at several years back. And we're right in that ballpark still, because if this was 7 weeks, you'd be a little over 11,000. If you were 8 weeks, you'd be a little over 13,000. So we are in that range. Depends how many weeks that we're closed on a Friday. So we wanted to put some numbers behind that so it made some sense to you. So this year, with the 6 Fridays that we would be closed, we would save almost $10,000. Any questions about that?
I think it is important to make sure that we have some sort of accountability between the building and the ones who are coming and going.
Can you speak up just a tad, please?
Sure. I think it's important that we have accountability in each building and some system put in place so we know when people are coming and when people are going. I mean, you don't want somebody leaving 20 minutes early every day for 4 days and then you gave them a whole hour at a time, so.
And the administrators are on site and are responsible for their buildings.
I mean, do they
As they
clock
would
in and
be
clock
now.
out, right?
Well, the administrators do not, but, and they don't currently now, right? We don't have a system in place now that says if you work before 30, that there's someone clocking out at 4:30 another day in order to get at 4:29 or 4:31. But the building level, and as Dr. Price said, then there is supervision of the buildings through the central office administration, teaming the buildings, although not at 5 o'clock every day or whenever they're ending time.
Can you speak up too, please?
Sure.
I was just wondering if the inconsistency were because we do have different start times, so maybe in the high school building, administrators coming in maybe a little bit earlier than the elementary ones are. Is that where the timing is off? That maybe some are starting 30 minutes later and others are starting 30 minutes before just because?
It would probably be best to have everybody starts at this time, everybody ends at this time, so there's consistency across the board. If you would have one child in kindergarten at Dibler, because they couldn't get into their kindergarten at Bedminster, you would think that Bedminster and Dibler would have the same summer hours. So it would be to our advantage to have the same hours at every building. Just so people aren't confused. If you have to come up to district office, you would think that it would be the same hours that they're working at Bedminster Elementary.
I'm thinking though, it's probably just like a 30-minute block.
But
Yeah,
still,
it's not a big difference.
assuming,
When Dr. Radigan and I had these conversations with principals in the past, what they were given some flexibility, half hour, an hour max in the summer due to what they felt would best meet the needs of their parents. So some buildings feel like they get a lot more traffic in the afternoon, they have a lot more people asking to come in later in the afternoon, others in the morning before work. So that's kind of how they try to set their hours. And then they and their secretaries plan their vacation schedules around that. So that's kind of how it has been in the past. But we have not set summer hours yet, so we'll certainly look at that again and have a discussion again this year and see how things have worked for the buildings. As far as, let's make one more comment about the accountability. Principals are responsible for monitoring their office staff in the summer. And remember, principals aren't hourly employees, they're salary
Right.
employees, and so they put a whole lot more hours in than we tell them to put in. So I don't
Sure.
really have a lot of concerns about the principals. I know they're putting their time in, and then they're responsible for monitoring their building, as Dr. Bolton said.
Right, we should have some sort of,
I would say from a technology perspective, I'm guessing the badges would probably have an access of when they logged on, when they swiped in and when they swiped out.
Most of their staff would be swiping.
So you
Yep.
technically probably run
well, not
reports on all
swiping
that stuff.
out.
Not
right?
swipe out, but I'm sure it would, you'd actually
No.
see the thing when they leave, because
Right, so we could get a printout of that, we would know.
Absolutely.
you could run reports.
Okay.
Are you really making them come to work on the
The
5th?
day after.
So can you
a
clarify
holiday.
I was gonna ask that too.
Can you
I
clarify
really
that
like
week?
that.
The
I
July
like-
4th week?
So-
Then they gain an extra 2 hours of time.
Yeah, so that week, they would be here, it would be it would be the only 8.5-hour week of the summer to match up with their paid holiday that they receive on the 4th. So they would be working 8.5 hours on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th. But, as always, they have the opportunity to take a vacation day, personal day, if they need to on that
okay.
day. So they can still take off that day as
Okay.
long as they submit it with notice. So I imagine we'll have people that don't want to be off that Friday.
I want them to go away.
But they may go away.
I just,
We won't keep them from traveling.
Okay.
but the other days, so Monday and Tuesday, and Wednesday of that week, they're working 8.5-hour days as opposed to the 10.5.
And
Okay.
the Friday.
So it wouldn't make, couldn't do the 10.5 those 3 days? and just
Can you speak up a little bit?
Couldn't do the 10.5 Monday through Wednesday and then do, is it just because it's 8.5 hours of paid time?
So
So they
currently,
lose
yeah,
that 2 hours of work that week?
if when July 4th falls on a Monday through Thursday, this is a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when it falls on a Thursday, if we were to provide Friday off, which we normally do, right, Friday's closed, they are getting 10.5 hours of paid vacation because each day is 10.5 hours long in the summer.
Bless you.
And so when you think about them getting 1 day off for July 4th, which is what the federal holiday is, 1 day is not 10.5 hours long, it's 8.5 hours long.
Right, that's true.
And so if they, under the current system, they are working 3 10.5 hours, and they are getting 10.5 hours of vacation. And so the thought process is July 4th, provided is a paid vacation day, a paid holiday. So everyone is getting their 1 day paid, and so they get 8.5 hours of paid vacation of holiday time for that day. To be able to then make that fair over the week, that becomes what I would call a normal week. So they're still only working 4 days,
Okay.
but the days are not Monday through Thursday because of the fact that the holiday's a Thursday. And I fully expect that most, if not all, of our buildings will be closed on the 5th, because I expect that many people will choose to utilize their personal or vacation time, which is fine. From that standpoint, we'll advertise that the buildings are not available that day. Both the secretary and the principal are going to be out from that standpoint. But that does then bring into line, if you take 1 day off, it is 1 day's worth of pay. It is the same thing that if someone takes a Monday off for a vacation in the summer, they're charged for 10.5 hours of work, because 1 day is not a normal day any longer. It's 10.5 hours of vacation that you spend. It's not 1 day of vacation that you spend. And so to make sure that calculation stays even, it's to recalculate the July 4th week because of the holiday.
Thank you.
Sure.
Makes sense.
Anything else with the MOU? Okay, thank you, and we'll move that forward to the March board meeting.
I want to also clarify that as we are looking to redo the support staff contract, this is an MOU that is required every year because it's not currently in the contract. We are working to include language so that this can be done every year automatically, and that we won't have to do an MOU anymore.
Yeah.
But that requires a change to the contract. So as long as the union will be, receptive to that, we can put in language that says in the summer there might be variance. As long as we're still working the same number of hours per week, that the 4-day week would be possible. So we're having those conversations.
Okay. All right, and the next item is the international trip proposal.
Okay, so currently, only, at least in the last several years that I've been here, and this is year 4 now for me, the only out of international trip we've run out of the country has been the German exchange that I'm aware of. And outside of that, there are some trips that run occasionally, but they're independent of Pennridge. So if a staff member is organizing a trip, they do it off campus, and it's not one that comes through the activities committee. So we wanted to increase opportunities for students to be immersed in other cultures and to have those experiences, and at the same time be able to monitor and ensure student safety. So we took the current trip request form, and the one that's in front of you tonight is, we titled it the International Trip Request Form, and it's essentially the same with 2 additions. And that is, under the cost section, we put a note in there that trip insurance is required. And that is because, as you know, turmoil can come about at any time when we're traveling foreign soil, and so we need to be aware and be monitoring those things. And I say that because that ties in with the other change, which is 3 sections below that, U.S. Department of State travel advisories. So, in other words, what we want to do, and these are the attachments that are to this. So there's the 1 through 4 level of travel advisory, with 4 being the do not travel, and 1 being that it's normal procedures, normal precautions for that area of the world. So someone proposing a trip would have to look in advance if it's an international trip, and they need to indicate on here, is it a 1 or a 2? Because if it's a 3 or a 4, we're not going to hear the trip. If it's a 1, it's a good time to travel. If it's a 2, we would consider it a case-by-case basis. The trip insurance then plays a role, because if this level changes at the time of the trip as they're getting close to it, they and the travel agency need to start thinking about possible alternative arrangements. And sometimes that doesn't mean necessarily canceling the trip. Sometimes that means an itinerary adjustment, and perhaps a city is skipped, or another trip could be planned if there's a backup trip. That's unlikely though. So it might not necessarily get to the trip being canceled, it could be an adjustment in the itinerary. But tour companies that have worked with our staff in the past have been good at monitoring the same thing, because they don't want to put their employees in harm's way either, just as we don't for our staff and for our students. So that's the two new sections. They would come to the activities committee just like any other advisor or teacher would. They'd present their trip, they would be present to talk to you and answer questions and present their trip. And then we would, through my office, Amanda and I would start looking at kind of probably a 2 or 3 year out proposals, so we don't have people competing against each other for the kids for the same trips. And I think that also is happening currently, which is a positive. If we funnel them through this committee, we can kind of control a little bit better who's running what trips when. So that's, I guess, what I'm asking for tonight is really your feedback. This is not a form that had been officially approved in the past, because you're approving the content on the form when the trip gets proposed. But really just if there's anything that you think, either tonight or when you leave here, that you think we should be adding or clarifying on this form, that we could do that. And then my intention would be in the next couple of weeks to meet with the teachers that we know currently run some of these international trips off-site independently, and talk to them about a new procedure in place, that they would have the opportunity to come through the activities committee, and we could be a Pennridge sponsored trip of that sort.
Is it a liability if a teacher is promoting a trip within the school, taking probably almost 100% of Pennridge students and taking them? I mean, should they, that just doesn't seem.
You're asking about the current process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem, if you're promoting it in the school, gathering the kids in the school, but meeting off premise, it still is a school trip.
So currently, the German exchange is the only one that works with students
But
in-house.
last year they went to Panama, like a group of students for our project went to Panama. They were all Pennridge students with a Pennridge teacher. Shouldn't it have technically been a approved trip? I mean, wouldn't that set us up for some sort of liability?
They're having meetings and things off campus, so this does make it cleaner. This absolutely makes it cleaner, yes.
I would just think that that there's not a huge separation there. If they're recruiting in school, there are kids, there are teachers, even if they're not meeting.
One of the clarifications and one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation is around the topic of liability. Because when it becomes a Pennridge sponsored event, if it is on one of these forms and at a school board meeting, these are approved, that yes, students are going to Panama or wherever they're going, there is a level of increased liability. Now, it doesn't make it that these are wonderful experiences for students, and so that is exactly why we're bringing this to you in terms of students having that opportunity and schools being part of that. There are employees who are doing this through outside companies and taking people. One of the things that we will clarify then is if it is not a Pennridge sponsored event, it will not be recruited during the school day. And so one of the things we need to be careful about is exactly what you're talking about. That I work on the outside and I run any trip, doesn't have to be international travel, right? I do a biking across Pennsylvania trip in the summer because that's something I'm into. I'm not using a captive audience to say, hey, Troy, you're in my class, will you go on this trip with me? You look like you like to ride your bike.
Right.
And so so that is something that we obviously will clarify through this process once we know the will of the board in terms of international travel, because that's not the only example. Panama is one of the examples.
That
in
was
terms of
just
those types
one
of things
that,
happen.
one of the girls that works for
But-
me said, oh yeah, I have a bunch of friends in Panama, they all went with the school. And I was like, wait, I didn't see any of that. What's going on? And they were like, oh, well, so I was like, oh, that sounds great, it's an art trip. But it never came across, my radar here. But that just seems like it would set us up for liability. Oh, it wasn't a school sanctioned event, but they found out at school where they're with all the Pennridge students or with a Pennridge teacher.
Yeah, this would
This
alleviate,
is
this would alleviate those circumstances.
Okay, because that would be.
Good question.
Okay, thank you.
On your form, what's precedent?
Precedent for the trip, meaning have they run this trip 2 years prior? Initially, you're not going to have much precedent for these trips. That was a section on our initial form, because,
Okay.
for instance, FBLA runs their trip for many, many years.
Okay.
So,
I'm
but
just
they may
thinking
have
of-
run this, and maybe it wasn't a Pennridge sponsored trip in the past, so they could talk about their experience with maybe their tour
Ah.
company here.
Right, okay, all right.
And these
Okay, I think
boxes
of anything
expand, they
else
get
that
this
you need.
electronically, so as they type, this expands, as you know, and they can type as much as they need to in there.
You should have on here, I see that you have itinerary and emergency plans, which is great. But your itinerary should include, if they know it, when they're going to do the request form, and I would assume they would, the names of all of the hotels, the contact information of the hotel. Do you do that at the next level? Is that what happens? They
Well,
submit this and then
They
you,
attach the itinerary, which has
Okay.
that information.
all that
Yes.
information on it,
Yeah, so they're kind of summarizing
how
here,
parents
but
get
then
a
they
hold of their
attach it.
kids. Okay, perfect.
And then this gets submitted to their building principal. Building principal needs to support the trip first,
Okay,
and then it comes to the committee. So it can stop there, or if there's questions or they need, additional information, it would happen before they even gets to my office and into the committee.
okay. And then your emergency plans would have all of the same, they would have all of the backup, where they would go.
Restated the
Yeah.
second time.
Basically.
Cheat sheet, handy cheat sheet.
I just feel like it's such a,
It's a mom thing.
Yeah, it's such a simple form, but I think it encompasses so much information, so I imagine your attachments get rather lengthy.
They do, and we started this, I guess around the time that I first came, and we wanted there to be consistency, because as presenters come, they're thinking, everybody's thinking something different in their
Mhm.
mind as they present to a committee. So this has really helped them bring consistency to the process. And
Okay.
those that have sat on the committee now for a while, or have been there these evenings when they're presented, they come and they're usually fully prepared to answer
Okay,
your questions
great.
and to present to you. So doesn't mean you can't answer a question, but when we send this out, you should have hopefully 99% of the information there in advance.
And then the student forms, so I know that for international travel, the State Department requires parental permission now that's notarized on a specific form. Now, those forms go with the student chaperone. So do you keep a copy of that on file in case there's some kind of emergency where the paper is lost? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, although I'm not sure of the form that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, it's relatively new, so it's anyway, so I just know that there's a form that you have to fill out for any child that's under 18. And actually, I think as long as they're in the school district, they would have to have it, because they're technically, yeah, they would have to be, you would have to have it. So there's a form, I'd have to look it up for you, that you have to have, it has to be notarized, and it's basically stating everything that's already on your form all over again. So it's a pain in the neck, but I'm thinking it might be wise to consider having that information for each student in advance of the travel, and then keeping it on file somewhere in the school district to keep it safe for them in case it's lost in travel. Does that make sense? Then it can just be,
We
fax
probably live
or
at
fax,
the building level,
email.
is what we do.
Yeah.
To date, are there any of these trips that, people have taken or have talked about that are not through outside vendors? Because many of these are through a tour company
Okay.
and so I'm sure the tour companies are fully aware of those requirements,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
may very well keep them, and our contact might be the tour company.
Okay,
Like in
yeah,
an emergency,
yeah.
we might call. Now, that doesn't mean this does allow individual teachers to do something into Canada, or, something that might be a little simpler to plan, and we would have to be in knowledge of that and make sure that we're following those regulations. But the majority of these, like I'm sure the Panama trip and that they're really third-party vendors, the tour companies, and
So
they're
they're
handling all
probably
of
on
that
top
and
of it,
paperwork.
okay.
And would be our emergency contact if there were some sort of accident or.
But it would be good to have the paperwork here, so you didn't have to contact the third party in case it's, you would hope their business hours wouldn't be closed, but,
Look,
you
we
know.
just want your form
never
to
know.
be 50 pages, that's all.
Yeah.
Just make it 50 pages.
With a few more attachments there. Okay, does anybody have anything else to add? Questions?
And I guess I just want to ask the question out loud to make sure I'm okay in terms of the will of the committee. People are comfortable with the concept of international travel, right? Because there are some school districts who make the determination that because of the uncertainty, that it's very, very limited, and it might be foreign exchange, it might, like, they put some very strict rules on it. When we do this might open itself up to students have multiple opportunities, and so we have multiple kids going multiple places in the summer, which is good for kids, but there is that level of liability and sponsorship that we want to make sure that the committee and ultimately the board is comfortable with, besides the details of the form. The form's the easy part. It really is the concept of international travel has not been common here except through somebody else.
Right,
And so now what we're saying is it's still gonna go through somebody else, but we are going to be aware of it and, sending students and communicating and all of those things that become our liability, on top of it. So, okay,
I'm
so we're just
split.
making sure. Okay? Well, that'll be something good to think about between,
Thank you.
in terms of now in the meeting, be thinking about what.
I think it would be different if you were allowing them to travel under level 3 and 4.
We're heading to small, yeah.
That's sort of scary, but since you level 1, level 2, and then at level 2, you can reroute.
But you never know. I mean, there was train bombings in France. There was, so even in those countries that are
We don't know what's
relatively
gonna happen
safe.
here.
Right, you
Yeah,
never
that's for
know.
sure.
Yeah.
And obviously, parents have to get permission for this, and these are gonna run in the summer, so they're not gonna get school time for these types of trips.
Right.
And the travel insurance would cover if there was any 2 to 3 changes, like it would go from stage 1 or stage 2 to 3. So it would cover the expenses anyway, so they would lose nothing except the trip, the experience.
Which is why we're requiring the trip insurance, because if it does change from 2 to 3,
Yeah,
the
so you-
expectation is
they
that
would
if
actually
it can't be
reduce
rerouted,
nothing.
that trip is canceled.
I think it was a level 2.
But
I would be hesitant
Well,
in going.
And he said that if it's a level 2, it's possible they would just skip a city or reroute,
Mhm.
right? Skip a city, reroute, change the itinerary, change the date even, You hate to do that, but for their safety, that's what you do.
Yeah, my son participated in one of these third vendor trips for that, exactly that, and they rerouted around Paris, because it was approximately about 8 months after something had happened there, and the State Department just said. And so they just changed the venue. Instead of going to Paris, they went to a different place that was not on the list.
Coming out as well, no.
Well, I mean, especially like you're saying, the third party vendors, they have their own risk. So, right, they don't wanna assume that risk either.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you. Okay, and we're back to public comment. So, Mrs. Furlong?
Sue Furlong, West Rockville Township. FYI, I know there's at least one company from around here, and I believe there are 2 and I don't know how much they cost, but they do provide, it's like 911 International, and if one of your children gets sick, or needs special transportation, or there's a death in the family and they need to come home, they arrange all of that for you. And that group, that business is out there. And there's one even in the industrial park where I work that sounds like, it's like International something or other, and it sounds like it's that. But the other one I believe is called International 911, something like that. So, maybe the individual parent could purchase that service. I don't know how it works. I just know they're there. My neighbor's brother he was the CFO for the company. So it is out there if you want that extra level of protection. FYI.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something happened.
I didn't even know that.
It's good.
Yeah, that would be an interesting additional rider that could be like purchased separately from the cost of the trip that we could make available. That's interesting.
No, we know.
Mhm.
For all our international trips.
Katie is suggesting also Leah.
All right.
Oh, yeah, from Taken. Leah Nielsen could come with you.
Oh, yeah.
No, why not?
Why not then?
Okay, we're adjourned.
All right, thank you.